The Fae have a way of making sure that further bargains only get you in deeper instead of into the clear, just like credit card companies or those student loan people. Now there's evil for you. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Geek Pantheon. I am Eric, and today we're talking about running Fey creatures, and specifically Archfey. And what brought up this topic for me is a point of inspiration. I have been reading the Dresden Files book series. There's 17 books currently out of a planned 22, I think. Currently on book 14, so making good progress. And the Fae play a pretty big role in those stories. And there's a lot of really interesting things that the author Jim Butcher does that I think would fit really well in a D&D game. So I want to talk about those and share my thoughts and hear from you all down in the comments below what you think, how you handle Fae in your games. Also, if you've read the Dresden Files, let me know that down below. We can talk about that because that would be cool. Anyway, Fae. We recently had The Wild Beyond the Witchlight released from Wizards of the Coast. I didn't do a video on this book, my bad. But it deals heavily with creatures of the Feywild and hags and things of that nature. And obviously you have a lot of player character options for warlocks and rangers and bards dealing with the Fey and Archfey. And so Fae can play a really big part in your game. That's not even getting into the number of monsters that are the Fae creature type. And I guess the point of this discussion in this video is putting a stronger divide between creatures of the Fae and creatures of the material plane. Specifically things like humanoids that are also sentient creatures capable of language. And in Jim Butcher's world with the Dresden Files, the Fae are divided into two pretty well-defined and separate camps, the Summer Court and the Winter Court. Obviously, different D&D settings handle this differently. Some have a lot of different courts. Some settings only have one or just two with summer and winter. So your mileage may vary and you may need to make some tweaks based on what is pulled from the Dresden Files books to use in your game. But let's get into it, because the first thing, kind of the first pillar of Fey creatures is the fact that they are who they are. They are created to be a way, and there is no deviating from that nature. They can't betray their own nature, I guess is an easier way to put it. And so if you have a member of the Winter Court who are typically a lot more cutthroat and direct in their treachery, then they're going to operate that way. They're going to come at the players. They're going to make it very clear to the players that, like, they don't like them, they're working with them, or they need something from them. Or if they're attacking them, they're just going to try to stab them. Whereas members of the Summer Court are a lot more duplicitous. They are friendly. They show a friendly face. They may even offer a helping hand. But they're still creatures of the Fae, and deceit is in their nature. To an extent. We'll get into it in a bit. But I like this concept of creatures of the Fae being very immovable in their nature and temperaments and how they interact with people. And no amount of persuasion checks or intimidation checks are going to be able to get them to change their nature. You can get them to back off. Like self-surviving might kick in and be like, okay, I'm going to die if I don't back off. But if the party encounters a red cap, which the monster manual describes as a homicidal creature of the Fae, you're not going to be able to talk a red cap out of being a homicidal creature of the Fae any more than you would be able to talk a brown bear out of being a brown bear. And I think that's a really great way of viewing it is, yes, creatures of the Fae are sentient, capable, a lot of them, sentient, capable of speech, that kind of thing, but they are still forces of nature. They aren't sentient creatures of the material plane that have been gifted with free will. And that's a very hard defining line for creatures of the Fae, that they have to operate within the confines with which they were created. And I think that's interesting. And I think from a DM standpoint, that can actually get you off the hook in a lot of ways, because if you have a villain or an antagonist or a rival that is a creature of the Fae, of the Winter Court, let's say, and they're a jerk to the party, the players won't get as agitated if they're aware of this wrinkle in the setting. If they know that, this is just the way they are and there's no changing them, then you can actually create an interesting sense of perhaps empathy or sympathy or pity for this very powerful Fey creature, because it will never have something that the players have, which is agency and the ability to change themselves and adapt to the world around them. The Fae are stuck as they are. And I think that's an interesting dynamic to play with. And yeah, as a DM, you can be a little bit more of a jerk to the party when role playing this character, because it's their nature. And the party can make a persuasion check to try and, maybe get them to like back off a little bit and like soften the edges, but they're never going to get them to act against their nature. And that's the big thing that I really like. And before we continue the video, be sure to give a like to the video, subscribe to the channel down below. That would be very much appreciated. And if you want to be part of the conversation surrounding these videos and join the community, we have a Discord down below, the link to which is down there, and a Patreon, patreon.com/thegeekpantheon. If you enjoy these videos and like to financially support my endeavors to continue making them for you all, that is the place to do it. Patreon.com/thegeekpantheon. Okay, the next thing about Fey creatures that I really like from the Dresden Files is anytime Harry is going into a situation where he's going to have to interact with members of one of the Fey courts, and he has somebody with him that hasn't had to deal with creatures of the Fey before, he always makes it very clear, like, do not take anything. If somebody offers you a glass of water, do not take it. If there's a bowl of candy sitting on a table, do not take any. The Fey never give anything away for free. They barter and thrive on favors. And so if you take something from them, they will expect something in return, even the most minor thing, nickel and dime their way to your soul. And I love that mentality, and I love that being part of their nature. And I love that they will try to trap people with that of, just a helping hand. Oh, you can owe me one. You can owe me one. That's something a Fey creature would say constantly if I were running a Fey heavy campaign is, you'll owe me one. And they will come calling to collect on that. But it's just like the quote that I shared at the beginning of the video from the 4th book of the Dresden Files, Summer Night, where the Fey courts really get introduced. They will want to renegotiate or add another wrinkle to a bargain they've already made with you to try and get you in deeper and deeper. And having the players aware, once again, all of this stuff should be made aware to the players so that they can play in the space with you in this regard. It's a game. Like, it's a back and forth. You're constantly posturing to try and get the upper hand in whatever deal you're trying to create. And that's half the fun of negotiating with a Fey. And the most terrifying thing that can happen when negotiating with a Fey is they say, okay, yeah, that sounds reasonable. If your players are negotiating with you as you are role-playing an Archfey, and so having a Fey that's constantly willing to barter and deal and give a favor and receive a favor also, boy, if the players are willing to just, yeah, totally, I can do this for you, that's no big deal. They try to flip one on the Fey, oh, that opens up, it's like a genie wish, where when they come calling on the favor, it's like, what are you going to say? What words are you going to use? And that takes me to the next pillar, which is touched on in actually Ghostfire Gaming's Grim Hollow Player's Guide. They have another transformation. If you all didn't watch my video on curses, I'll put a link there. They have transformations for things like lycanthropy and vampirism and all kinds of stuff that is really cool and really well done. Well, in the Player's Guide, they have one for a player character becoming a Fey. And so there are flaws attached with that the player character has to stick to. And one of them is basically the nature of a Fey creature making a promise or a bond. And this is also in the Dresden Files, where if they make a promise, they have to keep it. Not they try to. They physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally cannot break that promise. Now, what was the promise? Like, verbatim, what was the promise? And the example that Ghostfire Gaming gives in their Grim Hollow setting is, if you promise to not lay a hand on the prince, you're totally free to kick him because these aren't involved. And so that's another interesting thing to add to your Archfey, especially, is if they are brokering a deal, Like if you have somebody doing the Archfey Warlock patron, absolutely write the contract up with that player. Absolutely come up with what the relationship is, and adhere to it, and like have each party remind the other of like, you said this, and have that be a fundamental part of the Fae. And I think this all boils down to, just because in D&D a creature is sentient and sapient and can speak and interact with the players, it doesn't necessarily mean they have to have free will. If they are a creature of the material plane, absolutely. If they're a humanoid, they should have agency, they should have free will, all that kind of stuff. But for Fae or aberrations or celestials, I think it's more interesting if they are tied to a certain nature. They are forces of nature that can act upon the world. And that's how it is in Dresden Files. This is not just creatures of the Fae. It's like every magical creature is bound to who they are and what their nature is. And free will is purely the purview of humans, because Dresden Files is set in our world with magic just slapped on top. But in D&D, free will and agency can be the purview of humanoids, and then everybody else has to contend with trying to get their things done while being restricted by only operating within the certain confines of their home plane, essentially. And I think that's cool. I think that's interesting. And I think that makes those characters better, honestly, because adding restrictions forces them to be more interesting and think outside the box. If a Fae physically cannot backstab somebody that they have made a deal with, depending on the wording of the deal, but if the party did a good job lawyering up and there's an ironclad deal, then that's interesting if the Fae desperately wants them to fail, but they can't do anything to sabotage them. And then you can get into, okay, how many layers removed does this Fae need to be from the treachery before they're in the clear on their promise? Could they just, casually be talking to one of the other members of the court and mention what the player's plans are? I wasn't trying to sabotage. I was just talking. There was nothing in my promise that said I couldn't share information. You just said I couldn't sabotage. And so that becomes the interesting thing as a DM, is getting creative. It forces that creativity. It's the same reason I love random tables. When you throw yourself into the fire, you have to be creative to get out. And I think stuff like this does that. So let's talk about actually like running with these restrictions. We've already kind of touched on it, but like if the players are making a deal with an Archfey, I would absolutely pen and paper out, writing down the exact contract, and then sliding it across the table to the players and be like, this look good? And give them a chance to go over and maybe even notate, like, cross this word out. No, we want this word here. Give it back. You look it over, and then you sign it, they sign it, and you fold it up and put it in your notebook. And there it is. And you can go back and reference and be like, well, according to the contract that we signed, and have that there. And I think that's almost necessary if you're going to be playing the whole verbatim, like, loopholes are in the language kind of thing. So I think that that's a really interesting way to play the negotiation stuff. And this doesn't have to be a villainous, like, antagonistic thing. You could have sympathetic Fey creatures that desperately want to help the party, but they can't. That's another subplot in one of the Dresden books, is there are a couple members of a Fey court that want to help Harry, but the queen of their court has told them that they cannot. She has forbidden it. And so they have to get creative with how they help the protagonist without breaking the orders of their queen, because they can't. They are incapable. When they try to talk, their voices literally cannot escape their throats because of this magical bond that they have. So it's just a really interesting thing to play with. Player characters. We have some playable races that are Fey now, including the Hexblood lineage, fairies, things like that. And so if you have a player character that is wanting to play a Fey, then I think you could still play with this a little bit, but with the exception being you can't remove the entirety of a player's agency. As a DM, you can't do that. As a player, if you want to create a box that you have to play in, that can be interesting. It can also be really annoying to your fellow players. If you become the lawful stupid, but just, the Fey version that messes up party plans because, well, it's against my nature, I can't do that. That's going to be a real stick in the mud for the party. What I would do instead is allow yourself to have the freedom to operate, and you could make the restrictions really loose. But then additionally, I would have like your established personality, and then maybe just occasionally you randomly act way out of character. If you have a really like kind of somber character that's not a real big jokester, not a face of the party, they're kind of reserved, shy, and every once in a while they just pull a prank and they like cackle when the person falls for the prank. And everybody's like, what in the world? And then they go back to being their normal self. Just the face side of them just showed through the cracks a little bit. Stuff like that can be really fun and interesting to show that you have a different side to you based on your nature and who you are. And I think that can be really fun. Absolutely, the whole like, if you make a promise, you have to keep it to the word. I think that could work really well for a player character. Grim Hollow has it for their option. I think you could absolutely take that over and just slap it on somebody that wants to play a Fey creature and be like, hey, I think this would be fun and interesting. What do you think? What do you all think? Let me know down below. Have you all read the Dresden Files? Do you think that my assessments of the Fey from those books is good? Are there any interesting ideas that you want to try out at your table? And have you run a Fey heavy campaign? What did you do to make the Fey feel special and different and otherworldly? Let me know. Thank you all so much for watching. I will see you next time.